we'll go ahead and get started. So we're going to be making these face masks. They have elastic in the back. They're a little more complicated than some of the other models, but they're nice because they have a nice little pocket for the elastic to feed through, and then a pocket where you can add an additional filter layer. So if you're donating them somewhere that has surgical masks, they can put the surgical masks inside, and it helps protect them and make them last longer. Or if you're using like an alternative filter, some people are doing that, like non-woven polypropylene or something. Some people are adding in between to try and bulk up the filtering capability of this, because obviously this is not the same as using a surgical mask, but it is something. And so that's kind of the goal, or to help the surgical mask last a lot longer. So to make this, you'll just need about like a little less than a fat quarter's worth of fabric to make it. I have the link to the pattern in the event description. So I don't have a printer at my house. I don't know if you do, but that's okay if you don't. So what I did is I just used tracing paper, and I opened up the PDF of the pattern and checked. I used a ruler to check the scale of the pattern and made sure it was the full size of the pattern. And then I used the tracing paper on my computer screen and traced a copy, and then made a cardstock copy of that pattern. So there are 3 pieces to the pattern. There is the outer shell shape, which makes up the outside part of your mask. There's the inside liner piece that you cut out. That's a little bit smaller. You can see here, that's what it looks like, the 2 layered. And then there's the part that you're gonna mark onto these shapes so that you know where to stitch. And those are the same on both of these 2 pieces, so you only have to copy it once. And that will just be where you mark for yourself where you're going to be putting stitches, and where the seam allowance is going to be. So I have my sewing machine here. And basically, you're just going to fold your fabric in half. You're going to want to pre-wash it so that it doesn't shrink up when you clean the mask later. You want to fold it in half so that you only have to cut once when you're doing it. So you're going to do this once for the outer and then once for the inner. So you can put it down on top, trace it, and then cut it out. And then you're going to do the same thing for the liner. And once you've done that, you will end up with pieces. These are some that I did earlier that look like this. Oops. This is my liner color. If you're making them to donate, you probably want to put the lighter color on the outside because it'll help them know when they can visually see if it's getting dirty. If you're doing it for yourself, it doesn't matter, it's totally up to you. And you can just see again that one of the pieces, the outer piece, is just a little bit longer than this inner piece. And that's the main difference. And then you're going to take the liner pattern that you made, and you can line that up so it's centered on your pieces. Like this, so it's equal distance from this edge and this edge, and it'll be a little bit further on this side, but you want to keep this seam allowance even all the way around. And you can either mark it with a fine line marker. You can do that if you if you don't have a tracing wheel, or if it's hard for you to see the marks from a tracing wheel, you can just use like a pen like this to just mark the outside edges all the way around. And then that way you'll just have to do that and then do it on each individual sheet of fabric. If you have a tracing wheel, it looks like this, that just pokes little marks in the fabric. All you have to do is layer all 4 sheets of fabric and center it, and then you'll roll that over it. And then it'll mark every single layer of fabric with these little tiny perforations that you can use as a reference. Little tiny marks that are very hard to see on the camera. There is a little faint line that shows up. If that's too hard for you to see to sew by, or if you don't have one, I just got one, then you can just line this up and trace all the way around, and then you'll just flip it over to the other side of your 2 sheets and trace around. So whichever way you want to do it. When that's all set, the other thing you're going to mark is just about a 1/4 inch in on your liner fabric. You're going to make a second line from this straight edge, and that's for when we do the inner seam, basically. So that I'm just going to do with a pen because that's easy. So you can just use a ruler or a sewing gauge or whatever. And I'm just going to mark a 1/4 inch in. Each of these. So all of our ideaSPACE staff are working on these to donate to different places. Some of us are doing this pattern, some others are doing some other simpler patterns if they're newer to sewing. But I like how versatile this one is. So this is what I am making. It can be used by a lot of folks with a lot of different needs for the masks. So I just measured out a 1/4 inch from that original mark that I made in 2 spots, and then ran a ruler and made a mark across like that. You can kind of see there, and that's just going to be for stuff a little later. Now, if you're using any prints, you're going to want to take your 2 pieces and flip them around so the wrong side is on the outside edge. So my little smiley faces are now on the inside of my pieces of fabric. If you're using solids and they're the same, if your fabric looks the same on both sides, you can do it however you want, it doesn't matter. And then we're just gonna pin this, and we're gonna start by sewing along this edge. So I just put like 2 pins in here and here. No need to overpin it because then you just have to take more out later. And I have my sewing machine set up just to do a regular old straight stitch. I have plain white sewing thread, nothing fancy. I'm not a super advanced sewer, so if I can do it, then you can definitely do it. And feel free to, folks have their video and sound muted, which is totally fine. If you have any questions, you can open up the chat in the bottom corner. You're welcome to send a message and I'll try and answer whatever I can. So I have both my pieces of fabric flipped in half, or flipped inside out, and I have them pinned here so that the fabric doesn't move around while I'm sewing. And I'm just going to stitch along the curved edge that I marked earlier. So I think it's about a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And you just want to make sure that you're doing your little, if you have a sewing machine that can do reverse stitches, I just do a little forward stitch and a little reverse stitch and then a forward stitch on both sides so that it's nice and secure, because you are going to be pulling on these with elastic, so you want to make sure you're locking in the stitch. If you forget, you can always just add a little knot to the end of your thread as well. That's one done. You can see my little curved stitch. I am definitely not perfect at it, so you're not, don't be intimidated by the project. They've turned out fine. They don't have to be works of art. They just have to get the job done. So I'm going to do the same thing on this smaller piece. It's going to be the liner. Take those pins out. And just along that stitch that we made, we're just going to make little snips in the seam allowance so that when you put tension on this, it kind of curves nicely and it doesn't get all like warped and wonky on the edges. So just every like 1/2 inch or so along that edge. Take a good chunk away from your stitches so you don't accidentally snip them. But we're just going to go all the way along the edge. And that just gives us some give for the curve. And we're going to do that to both pieces. Then I'm going to see if my iron is hot, and it is not. I'm going to close my iron. I'm heating up my iron because the next thing that we're going to do is just iron these little flaps that we're making here down in either direction along the seam so that it lies flat and you don't end up with like weird bunching around your nose. So what I'm going to do is just fold these down like this, all the way along as I iron, so that they lie flat against one edge or another of this piece. Okay. Swap cameras so you can see that a little bit. I don't have a second great. You will see that I do not have a second table in here, so my iron's on the floor. So that's where I'm going. Again, it doesn't really matter which side you fold it to. You kind of flatten these out. And we're going to do the same thing to both pieces. I am making a bunch of these, so what I did was just go through, once I did a few to get the hang of it, and then I went through and cut all the pieces for all the fabrics that I had, so that I wouldn't have to keep stopping to cut fabric again. I kind of go do the stitching and little breaks for ironing, but not have to worry too much about jumping back into like a different mode of things. Good. Then you can see it just kind of iron down flat a little more. It does not have to be perfect at all, because whatever, you're just gonna end up stitching them down the rest of the way anyway. So as long as it's pretty close, you'll be good. So you just want to flip this now right side out and kind of push into the curve so you can see. And you can already see that it's starting pretty immediately to look like the face mask, just pretty unfinished. And what we're going to do is just do a top stitch on the front of the mask on the side that you put these little flaps, so that it pins them down against the fabric and then they can't pop back up. So if you haven't top stitched before, I had not done a single top stitch in my entire life until a week ago, so it's not that bad. And it's just a straight line. The curve is all this way, so it's not so bad. Again, I'm just taking a second to do those back stitches at the beginning and the end so that you have a really secure stitch. And you can see here, all I've done is run a little tiny stitch on the outside of the mask itself that just pins those folds down so that that lays nice and flat once we assemble everything together. And I'm going to do the same exact thing on the inside. So I'm just going to flip these two pieces, pop them, make sure the curve looks pretty smooth. Figure out which side I put my tabs on and then stitch along that side as close to the seam as you can. But just try to keep it consistent as you go. And this will be a little easier to see because it's on the orange, but that's our original seam. And then this is what you're doing now, this little top stitch, just to pin down all of that little excess seam allowance that we don't really want getting in our way later. And I like to trim this little top doohickey just to get it out of my way for later. If you end up with a little like pointy part on top, it doesn't hurt to get rid of that. So then we're going back to this little mark that we had made here, and we're gonna make so that it has a nice finished pocket for you to put your extra filter medium in or your surgical mask in. We're just gonna fold that down at the line, and we're also gonna tuck a little bit underneath just so it's a nice clean seam, and then top stitch along the top here. So I'm gonna iron it so that it is easier to work with. Yeah, you can definitely sew these by hand. Someone asked if you can sew them by hand. You definitely can. I've sewn a lot of things by hand in my life. I only got this machine about a year, like a year and a half ago. And before that, you know, I've made aprons and stuff sewing it by hand. It just takes longer, but it's a good thing to do while you're watching TV. It's just going to be a back stitch the whole way, so you're just going to do everything that we're doing because all this is doing is sewing a straight line. So this isn't doing anything you can't do by hand. It just takes longer. So I'm just going to iron this really quick so that it's folded up on the edges. If you want kind of a better look at that, we just folded at the line and then I folded a tiny bit more so it's like a nice clean little loop here. So it looks like that. So one fold and two folds. And I fold it, you could fold it either way, just depending on how you want it to look. I fold it in so I don't have to worry about what any of this really looks like, and it's just really clean and I don't have to think about it, but you could do it either way. So I fold it in to the side that we already marked with the, that we already have all this gobbledygook happening on the inside so that I don't have to deal with it again. And so now you're just regular old straight stitch, so that's nice and easy. I'm gonna do both sides. When you're finished, all you're doing is just cleaning up that edge so that it looks nice, because that's going to be open. We're not going to stitch that to the other piece because that's going to form your pocket. So I did that on both sides. This is the inside on mine with that little nice little piece that I tucked in. And then the outside on mine just looks like a straight stitch across, but it's got that little curved edge instead of the raw fabric. And then I'm gonna find my scissors. I'm just gonna clean up any of these loose threads to get them out of my way. And we're gonna start actually putting the mask pieces together because we now have two pieces. And we're gonna put them together inside out. So we want the good sides facing each other right now. So I'm gonna take the pretty side of my print and the nice stitched side of this, and I'm gonna put them facing each other on the inside. So the ugly part of our sandwich is on the outside. I'm just going to take some time to get this all lined up. So that the curves at the top and the line at the bottom of the mask all line up with each other. And then I'm going to pin it. And I just usually do 3 pins on the top, 1 in the middle, 1 on each side, and then 3 pins in the bottom, same thing. Again, we're just going to flip this inside out at the end, so we don't want to be looking at the nice part. We want it to look bad right now. But if you accidentally sew it the other way, it doesn't take that long to pull stitches out, so it'll be fine. You can see now that my bottom and my top line up here and at the top here and everywhere. And so the next thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna sew a line along the top part here where the orange is. You can ignore this, the pink flaps for now, these like external parts. And also a second line on this side at the bottom where the orange is. Again, ignoring these little flaps for now because these are going to become the loops for our elastic. And we're also going to leave these edges alone because we want this to be a little pocket for the filter or the secondary mask. So I'm going to start with the bottom one because it's easier because it's a straight line. Again, I'm just going to start at this orange corner. I'm going to ignore this pink for now. And you're just going to sew along the line of that mark that you made at the very beginning. There will be a seam allowance mark for you that you marked out at the beginning of this process. So you're going to follow that. There's just a little curve there, but it's not too bad. And you can pop those bottom pins out so you don't accidentally stick yourself with them. And then, so that is our little bottom seam here. It's easier to see on the side. So it just starts here and ends here, and we ignore these little flaps on the side. I'm going to do the same thing to the top. Just take your time on this part because there's a little more of a funky curve happening. So just take it slow if you need to, and then you can always go faster. And again, you're just following the marks on the fabric. And we can pop those pins out. And again, we just have this little top seam that follows the curve, stops at the orange on either side. So now we can flip the mask right side out from this little pocket space here. And the next thing we're gonna do is just iron it again so that the seams on the top and bottom are really flat. And then we're gonna do just a nice top seam on both of those so that it has a nice crisp edge and isn't kind of billowing out like this. And it just holds it flat like that. So I'm just gonna go through and pop out all the seam and make sure it's nice. And then I'm gonna iron it so the mask is as flat as I can get it on the edges. Oops. I'll swap my camera again. We get as close on the seam as I can manage. I'm also going to straighten out these flats because they tend to want to triangulate. My full attention on them. And we're going to do the same thing to the bottom. And try and flatten that seam out as best we can. Once you're pretty happy with that, so that's just like flattened out a lot more. So just want to make a little, just has like nice surface around us. And make sure it stays that way. We're going to stitch all along here again, but on the outside. So let me swap you back. So again, we're right side out now, and we're just going to do the top edge, and this time we're going to include the pink flaps because they have these nice little folds in them now, so we want to like keep them nice like that and get rid of the raw edge that's on the inside here. So we're going to stitch all the way along the top and all the way along the bottom, including the pink flaps or whatever color your mask is. There's my top one, and again, it's just like my stitches are kind of crooked because I'm going kind of fast, and that's fine because again, it's more function than style. You can also use a thread that matches your fabric a little better, and then it will also disguise any wonkiness that happens. It basically looks like a mask now. We just have these little raw edges. So this is the very last step. The last thing that you're gonna do is just basically the same thing that we did on the flaps on the inside part of the liner, but this time we just want the loop to be exposed on the edges. So we're just gonna fold a tiny piece here to get rid of the raw edge, and then do a big fold all the way so that it meets this part. And these parts are still, these ends are still open when we stitch, so that you can feed your elastic or cloth ties or whatever you're using through. So I'm just gonna do a top stitch again across here, and you just wanna go as close as you can to the orange fabric while you're still catching the pink, because that will allow you more space to feed whatever you're using as straps through. And if it makes it easier for you, you can iron this as well. I'm just gonna not make you guys swap cameras again. So go ahead. Close as I can to the edge of the orange. What we have is this nice little loop of fabric that you can feed elastic bands through. We've been using, you can either use like kind of a classic elastic sewing cord, or this kind of like spongy material stuff. That's hard to get because it can be a little tricky to buy right now. Or you can just stitch yourself a little long piece of cotton from the ends of your fabric. Or even some people are snipping t-shirts, and then when you stretch a knit cotton out, it kind of locks the fraying edges in when you do that, and you end up with a nice long piece of cord, and you can use that too for a tie-on option. So all I have to do now is this same thing on the other side. So tiny fold and then a big fold to the edge of the orange, and I'm just going to sew as close as I can to the orange without actually catching the orange, because we want to leave that open for the pocket. I'm just trimming all those extra threads that might be hanging out. Grab this. My cord pile. The trickiest thing is figuring out kind of how long this should be. Let me see what I ended up with on mine. For these, if you're using this sturdier elastic, if you're using the lighter weight elastic, it's going to be more forgiving. But this is just a little denser. So this is about 25 inches. And you can do it one of two ways. You can do one big loop that goes like this, like a circle through our two pockets, and then that becomes the two straps here. Or you can do individual ear loops, so then that would just be two loops, one on this side and one on this side. A lot of people find those really uncomfortable though, so I'm not doing that because that seems uncomfortable. It's a lot easier to have pressure on the back of your head than on your ears, especially if you're wearing them for a while. The nice thing about the cord is that it is easier to feed because it's a little sturdier, but it also is like more intense in terms of pressure with the elastic. So it can be a little uncomfortable sometimes, but we can feed this through. And then loop it around and feed it through the other side. And elastic's also a little tricky to tie, so I'll show you the knot that I've been using. By ours. So that is looped through both edges. This will be again the outside with the lighter pink, so it'll show any dirt and stuff like that, and you kind of have a better sense, especially if you're giving it to healthcare workers of any kind. It's easier to tell when it needs to be cleaned. And then the orange inner liner. And it's good to do it 2 different colors so you remember which side was the outside side and which side was the inside side, so you're not swapping them back and forth. So here is the knot that I've been doing, and I'm going to try and show this to you. So you're going to take the right side cord in your hand and do a loop like that. So around and behind. And then you're going to do the same thing with your left side cord, except that it goes through. I'm going to mess it up. It's going to go through this loop. So it's like this. And then both of these are gonna, you're gonna grab both of those and feed them through the center loop that's formed and tug on that. And that was probably really hard to see. So I will add a link to the knot tutorial to the event listing so that you can see an actual diagram of it, because that will be a lot easier than watching me do it. But then when you tighten this, that's like a much sturdier knot for elastic than if you just tried to double knot it. It's not going to stay. It's called, someone asked what the name of the knot is, and it's called some people are calling it a dead knot. But I found like several things that are called that. I don't know very much about knots. So I'm going to find y'all and that's what the pattern says, just tie a dead knot. I'm like, I have no idea what that is. Let me find. I will put the link to it in there. Trying to see if I can find it immediately. I don't see it right away, so I'm just going to post it in the event description later tonight. Yeah, great. So I will do that. And because it is definitely in my internet history. because I was practicing. But it does hold a lot better than that classic knot. So I'm happy to answer any other questions any folks have. This should have been recording, so I should be able to post the video later so that if you need to rewatch some of it as you go, you can. Everything is written out in the instructions on the link to the instructions that I was following to make these. It's just, I find it helpful to kind of watch somebody do it once through to really conceptualize what you're doing and get the hang of it. But otherwise, we totally did it. So happy mask making. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll hang out for a little bit longer. Go searching for some knot links. Thank you all for coming.